First, I would like to say also that I fully agree with the introduction that Torsten did. I think you made many of the key points that I would like to make in my intervention as well. If I can get this to work well. And I also want to say from the outset that the deregulation of national labor law and the attacks on collective bargaining that we are seeing is not just a result of the crisis, it's also very much a political choice, unfortunately. I think that the crisis is really an opportunity for those that want to weaken trade unions and collective bargaining institutions. And I think that we can particularly see two trends. First of all, the decentralization of wage bargaining. And secondly, where institutions, governments are trying to get rid of trade unions altogether. We have lots of examples of this, and I would just like to underline a few of them. I mean, we were all quite surprised, to say the least, when we saw the DG ECFIN report on labour market developments in Europe. And I want to quote this report because I think it's really quite grave what they say here. Here they imply that reforms that decrease worker and social rights are employment friendly. And the measures that they are advocating are decreasing the generosity of unemployment benefits. So this is positive, this is employment friendly according to the Commission. Measures that decrease notice periods, measures that increase trial periods in permanent contracts, measures that increase the maximum calculated duration of fixed-term contracts, and measures that increase retirement age or penalties for early retirement schemes. And as to the wage-setting framework, policies that decrease minimum wage are to be classified as job-friendly measures. And as you can imagine, this is not something that trade unions are very happy to hear. And I believe that these kind of conclusions are purely political, ideological. I mean, where is the proof that a reduction in minimum wage will actually create more jobs? Why is nobody talking about increasing profit margins? I mean, if you have a company and if you decrease the minimum wages of the employees, how can you be sure that the company will employ more workers? Maybe they would just have an increase in their benefits. And I think this is an issue that should be addressed as well. But what is even worse in this report is that the Commission states that government interventions that reduce the coverage of collective bargaining and result in an overall reduction in the wage-setting power of trade unions are also employment friendly. And I believe that these kind of statements are in contradiction with the treaties. I mean, Torsten, I think you mentioned Article 153 earlier. I would like to underline a couple of other articles. We have Article 152 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. And here it says that the Union promotes the role of the social partners. It shall facilitate dialogue between the social partners, respecting their autonomy. And I would rather say that the Commission, instead of promoting the role of the social partners, it's really promoting the role of one partner, the employers. And I also want to cite Article 151, which is about fundamental social rights and the improvement of living and working condition. Because I wonder if the Commission really believes that reducing the wage-setting power of trade unions will improve living and working conditions in Europe. For me, that's very difficult to see. And I think we have a very worrying situation if we cannot count on the Commission being the guardian of the treaties. So this is one example, the DG ECFIN report. We have other examples. At the end of last year, the Commission launched a consultation to small enterprises, asking them to identify the 10 most burdensome pieces of legislation. And this consultation was done in a way that the Commission had just listed a number of their directives and regulations, and then the companies were invited ticking boxes. Oh yes, that directive is quite burdensome, and that regulation is very burdensome as well. And in this list you would find one social dialogue tool. You have the parental leave framework agreement, and there was also the working time directive, which at that time was being negotiated. A revision of that directive was being negotiated between the social partners. And yet you would find this in a consultation where the Commission invites small companies to complain about it. And I think that is really outrageous, and it's really undermining the autonomy of the social partners. And then we have the measures that are being imposed by the Troika. Torsten, you also mentioned it in your introduction. These measures are going in the same direction: decentralization, collective bargaining, introduction of stricter representativeness criteria, and also the dismantling of collective bargaining and social dialogue institutions. And to this, we also have to add the new economic governance structure. The representative commission spoke a little about these new structures. We have the annual growth survey with the country-specific recommendations. We have the macroeconomic imbalance procedure. And I was a bit concerned because I think you said that the wage recommendations, they were only one ingredient. There are many other ingredients as well. But the wage, you have 17 wage recommendations, or you have wage recommendations to 17 member states. So it shows that there's quite a lot of focus on wages, and it's all about reducing wages. You said so yourself, attacking indexation as we have it here in Belgium. I haven't seen any evidence that this indexation of salaries is actually a real wage rigidity, was the way you put it. I would rather say it's the opposite. I think that because we have this wage indexation in Belgium, the situation is not as bad as it could have been, because with the automatic increase in salaries, we can try to keep the purchasing powers of workers and citizens. And I also want to point out, when it comes to these recommendations, that there is no real dialogue, consultation of the social partners, which is also a problem, because you agree on these recommendations with the Council, but where are the social partners? Why are they not really invited? In two countries, we managed to change the recommendations, so they were changed in the Council, and that was Sweden and Italy. So in Sweden, for example, social partners, they agreed that they could not support the recommendation that minimum wages or the lowest level or the lowest wages in Sweden were too high, because that was the recommendation that the Commission wanted the Council to adopt. So I think it's very clear that the whole thinking of the Commission, the European institutions and so on, it evolves around the idea that the future of Europe lies in wage moderation. In order to be competitive, wages have to come down, and currency devaluation is to be replaced by internal devaluation, as was also said by Torsten earlier. And I think that these assumptions are not really supported by the evidence. I would like to refer to a recent study which was done by Professor Stéphane Collignon, which is called Macroeconomic Imbalances and Comparative Advantages in the Euro Area. He concludes in his study that more centralized wage bargaining by wage coordination across sectors, extending collective bargaining and strengthening of trade unions improve the competitiveness in the Euro area. And I think actually most research tend to stress the importance of coordination and of decentralization. And here I would also like to use a graph from a recent ILO publication, ILO Employment Working Paper, Employment Protection and Collective Bargaining. In this table, you can see, you have on the left hand, you have the employment rate, and these, what do you call them, staples? The blue ones. The first one, where it says 1, the figure 1, it means that wage coordination is completely fragmented. The last one, 5, means that wage coordination is completely centralized. And you see where you have the best result. Where wages are completely centralized, you also have the highest employment rate. And I also want to emphasize that although single countries may try and hope to export themselves out of a crisis by moderating wages, if a policy of competitive wage cuts are being pursued simultaneously in a number of countries, I'm afraid that this will lead to the race to the bottom, shrinking aggregate demand for all the countries involved. It means that member states will start undercutting each other. And I think that is a very worrying trend when we see that the Commission is focusing on cutting wages in so many countries. And I think that also this focus on wage reduction will draw the attention away from what in reality has been happening in terms of inequalities, because this is again something that we are not really hearing a lot about. The fact is that the share of wages in GDP has fallen in deficit countries as much as it has fallen in surplus countries. And here I have another graph to show you. In this one, you have the green line is Germany, which is a typical surplus country. And here you can see that the wage share has fallen from 60% of GDP in 2000 to only 54% in 2008. That was when the financial crisis started. And now the wage share has re-increased and is now around 58%. And so this green line here is Germany. But I have about the similar development for Spain, who is considered a deficit country. I have that on the next slide. Here you can see that Spain also started off from almost 60% of the wage share in 2000, and then it decreased to 55% in 2008. So it's quite a similar development. But in contrast to Germany, this fall in the wage share is continuing, and at this moment the wage share is really collapsing, and it's also the same for the other deficit countries in Europe. So how do we explain rising wage costs but falling wage shares? Well, the explanation is that the economies of the deficit countries, in contrast to Germany and Austria, they got overinflated by an asset boom, pushing house prices and private sector debt to irrational levels. And if asset price bubbles develop, they need to be addressed by financial and economic policies. One cannot just shift the burden to wages, which is actually what is happening. And then before concluding, I would just like to also make an additional comment about why it is so dangerous to only focus on wages. Because if we are depressing wages and prices in the deficit countries, it implies that the nominal income of people are falling while their national debt burden remains the same. The result is that the purchasing power of wages is squeezed and squeezed, while the real burden of debt continues to increase. And this is, of course, not a sustainable development. And this is exactly what we have seen in Greece, in Portugal, and in other countries. And I think another thing which must not be forgotten is that Spain, Portugal, and Greece, they do not really compete with Germany on equal terms. And here I have another one. Here you can see the share of these countries, the share of complex products in a country's export. So you can see that the share of Germany, which is at the first staple there, is very high. It's over 60%, the share of complex products, while in Greece it's below 20%, which is the extreme right end here, and Portugal just before, where you can see that it's somewhere around 25%. So the euro area deficit countries, they certainly lack competitiveness, but it's not caused by their labor being too expensive. It's really related to the types of products that they export. They are stuck in the type of manufacturing goods also produced by many other, especially low-wage countries. And I have just the last graph that I want to show you here. Well, that perhaps won't come across very well, it's difficult to see, but in the table here, your first country you have is Belgium. You can see that the hourly labor cost in industry is very, very high in Belgium. It's 39.5, while Germany is also rather high, 33.1. But if you then go down and you have a look at Portugal, it's only 10.3. Per hour. So you can see that they are not really competing with each other. I mean, that's not the issue here. And if we would enter into that, if we would cut salaries even further in those countries, I don't really think that would make them able to compete with Germany, because that is not what is going on. And I think that is also very important to bear in mind when we have these discussions on wages. Thank you very much.